to welcome you here to the Seminar on Cultural History at the Bard Graduate Center, both you here in the hall and our viewers out there in cyberspace. I just want to comment for the benefit of those who are used to being here on a Wednesday evening, sitting around a table in a relaxed seminar format. Do not fear, the tables are not gone forever, but for the moment, until we figure out exactly the best ways to project ourselves into the world, we're adopting this more conservative format, but it shouldn't, I hope, affect the vigor and playfulness of the interactions afterwards. Our speaker tonight, visiting us from Marseille, is Arundhati Virmani, who is at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales at the Centre Norbert Elias, where she has been since 1994. She has a master's in history from Delhi University and did a PhD at the Sorbonne on the politicization of the French countryside before the advent of universal suffrage. She then went on to teach at Delhi University from 1987 to 1991 and at the University of Bordeaux III from 1991 to 1992. She is the author of a series of publications on colonial India, including India 1900-1947, Un Britannique au cœur du rage, published by Autrement in Paris in 2001, and A National Flag for India, Rituals, Nationalism, and the Politics of Sentiment, published in Delhi in 2008. A more recent work, the Historical Atlas of India from the 6th century before Christ until the 21st century, published in Paris in 2012, examines long-term historical change in India through the study of more than 90 maps. And interestingly, 2 exhibitions have been organized around the publication of this atlas, one at the India International Center in 2012 and the Maison des Sciences de l'Homme in June of 2013, and a third one is to open at the Cambridge University Library this year. Other publications in French include L'Inde, une puissance en mutation, published in 2001, and forthcoming a book, India, People on the Move, and Emotional Pasts, Questions for Indian Political Culture. And I think it's out of that project on political culture and emotions that tonight's project that we will hear about on wedding cards emerges. And I would just say, for those of us with a slightly longer local memory, the wedding cards project reminds us of an earlier focus exhibition done here by Ken Ames on a century of American Christmas cards and the various issues that are encoded in these simple and seemingly banal objects. So it's with great pleasure and anticipation that I welcome Arundhati Virmani to our podium here tonight.
Thank you, Peter, for this nice welcome. Thank you to the Bard Graduate Center for having me here this evening and hosting this talk. And thank you, everyone, for coming here to listen to this slightly unusual subject. And on Indian wedding cards, I don't know if you've ever received an Indian wedding card. I sort of grew up receiving them and never gave it a second thought until it sort of became a question in my mind, which I will explain just now. So in fact, every year in India, there's a season from late September to January. It's just after the heavy monsoons and the onset of the summer heat. And many people, about 2 million roughly at least, are likely to receive a letter by post. No, this is not an income tax return document, as many of the French would shiver and think, but it's something much more pleasant. This is a wedding card, or what we call in India, a nimantran patra, literally an invitation letter. In any one season, there could be around 10 million weddings taking place in India. Last November, which was considered a particularly auspicious year, 60,000 couples were estimated to have tied the knot in one evening in Delhi itself. So marriage, as any Indian will tell you, especially an Indian mother, is the most important event in life in this world. It is also the most expensive. Parents begin saving as soon as the child is born, or they may take loans. They're called auspicious loans today. An average wedding costs around $34,000. That is more than an year's earnings of a middle-class Indian family. Whereas an upper-class Indian wedding would come to $1 million. And the most outrageous Indian wedding in the last decade took place at the Château de Versailles, which was rented by the ArcelorMittal steel magnate Lakshmi Mittal. That was estimated at $60 million. The marriage ceremony and ritual has not only survived these last few centuries, it has flourished, and more recently, it has taken on a very flamboyant, aggressive aspect, which is credited as much to the enrichment of the Indian middle class as to a Bollywood influence. The Indian marriage, in fact, is quite unique. The actual wedding ceremony stretches over several days with elaborate pre-wedding rituals that include pujas, their prayers officiated by a priest, a night of folk songs, then another evening decorating the girl's hands and feet with henna, or mehndi as we call it, mutual exchange of gifts amongst close family members. Although the central wedding ceremonial lasts only one day, it is followed by other elaborate private and public post-wedding celebrations. A recent celebrity wedding went up to 13 functions. So whilst the marriage ritual has excited much commentary and has long been the object of anthropological analysis as a key institution of social organization and family lineage, one element of this Indian marriage has remained invisible. This is the wedding card, which tends to be forgotten before the more flamboyant aspects like the wedding dress, the wedding sari particularly, the exhibition of jewelry, the exotic locations in which the wedding will be held, the frames, and not to speak of the extravagant stage effects that now accompany weddings. Yet, wedding cards constitute a voluminous corpus that attests to their importance in Indian social practices. True, it's the least expensive item of the wedding if we compare it to the pandal, which is the wedding tent or the shamiana, the music band, the bride sari, the jewelry, the food, the decorations, or the presents. A simple wedding card used to cost less than $1. But it was always the most crucial element, without which the wedding couldn't even begin. Today, an official registration of a traditional wedding in India has become legally compulsory since 2005. It requires that the application form be accompanied by the printed invitation card, along, of course, with the wedding photograph and the priest's signature. There is nothing astonishing about the fact, then, that the inflation that has struck all the elements of the marriage without exception has also hit the simple piece of paper. The material arrangement, it must be admitted, has not altered drastically. In its current form, it was clearly a colonial construct, adopted in the 19th century, first by Indian elites, princes, merchants, and rich landlords, eager to share colonial social practices and etiquette. The wedding card was thus a clone of the Victorian wedding card, very much like any other wedding card in the West. A standard wedding invitation had a utilitarian function. It provided information. Who would take place, the program, with a RSVP. Here you see a very old one, which is in English, and it's very simple. It's a very simple format. You can see the RSVP in the right-hand corner. It gives the place, and this is how it all began. And so it remained for a long time a very simple carton, which was sent nevertheless to hundreds of people. However, it was delivered personally to close family. The closer the relationship, the greater would be the ceremonial accompanying the delivery of the invitation. It would be carried over personally by the parents to give to uncles and aunts, and it was always accompanied by a box of sweets or fruit, and to colleagues it would be handed over in the office, to friends it could be posted. Since the 1950s, for a long time it remained a very simple rectangular carton, very sober, very restrained. This is an example of a South Indian wedding card. And it almost resembled more bureaucratic invitations to state ceremonies like Independence Day in the 1960s. The only difference was that, it could feature these traditional elements. Here you see all the gods of the Hindu pantheon, and then there's a little decorative border, which you can see it's in red and green. So these are the auspicious colors. And that's how it differed from a bureaucratic invitation to a state function, which would be in white. It could have, feature an image of the Hindu god Ganesh. And so there's a strictness about it, which corresponded to the political context of the 1950s and the 1960s, a context of government regulations, the state agenda of social reform that looked upon ostentatious consumption with disfavor and placed a ceiling on wedding expenditures. It imposed sobriety and simplicity, not to talk about the paranoia about black money. Everyone was scared to really demonstrate their wealth or exhibit their wealth because they were scared of the income tax raids on the premises, and you couldn't have that while a wedding was taking place. It would be most inauspicious. So, as you see, it followed a standardized form, and there's little space for fantasy here. There were no curious shapes. It could be a smaller rectangular or a longer rectangle. But in the 1980s, a few changes occurred. I'd just like to show you this example from the 1960s, which is, of course, very rich. You can make out it's a wedding of a princess in 1960, but it's still very sober. And there's, you can see the blazons in the two corners, and it's very distinctive. If you compare it with this card, you can see this is a very simple card. And just anecdote, as an anecdote, this is my wedding card. And so we could have a look at that later. But in the 1980s, the material, a few changes have occurred. And you can see this in this card. The material has become a little more ethnic, in tune with the development of ethnic fashion, which itself was a consequence of the state promotion of traditional handicrafts and folk designs. So invitations could now be in handmade paper. And motifs became more assertively traditional. Envelopes containing the wedding card could be stained with turmeric, as the use of turmeric paste is a sign of auspiciousness. It's very central to all the rituals of an Indian wedding. So from what was a purely textual design in the 1880s, the wedding card incorporated a little more design, but still quite restrained. And despite all these developments in its form, it still continued to be produced in small printers' shops in specific parts of the city. Some parts of Old Delhi, for example. I remember going with my husband to a very shady kind of street and saying, now this is what I need. And streets occupied almost entirely by small traders' shops, dirty little printing offices in narrow lanes, which had a few templates of wedding cards, but one could negotiate and say, you know, we want a little something different. And it could be in the principal languages practiced in Delhi. So English was the most commonly used, being the language shared by all communities who have settled in Delhi. But other languages like Hindi, Sanskrit, a little bit of Sanskrit, English here, and there could be other languages. We saw the wedding card earlier, which was in Tamil, but you could have wedding cards in Bengali or in Gurumukhi, which is the language of the Punjabis. And in short, the wedding card presented, I would say, the following defining features. First, it was small enough to be easily manipulated by the hands. Second, it consisted of two parts, the card itself and a special envelope containing it. And both the card, third, and the envelope had geometrical forms. The fourth element was that the visual and the tactile qualities were of prime importance. There was no personal handwritten message on this card, no signature, no "Dear Peter Miller, you are invited on the 4th of November to an auspicious event." And finally, and this is important, the wedding invitation, which was sent out in hundreds, was never preserved, except by concerned family members. They were almost always thrown away, never displayed in drawing rooms. They were ephemeral objects for strictly private use. In recent years, however, the card has undergone some dramatic changes. From a sober minimalist carton, it has turned into a wildly colorful, imaginative, personalized, and quite expensive item. A nice one today would cost roughly $40. If its structure has not changed fundamentally, it has nonetheless undergone a significant material transformation, which I would describe according to its principal material features. First, its size. It has taken on bigger proportions and sometimes very elaborate proportions. The simple card has almost disappeared to give way to the folded card or even to a book invitation. The new age wedding invite comes in multiple folds. So these are some examples of the new kinds of wedding cards, you know, and shapes. And the scroll is very trendy now, with a little box, as you can see. And here is a delightful invitation, which is in the form of a very traditional pankha, the Indian fan, a very ordinary object, you know, which you fan yourself with in the summer. And it's a very old-fashioned kind of object, but here it's been sort of transformed. And so now it comes in multiple folds with one main card and 3 to 4 add-on cards. These could include specific invitations to each successive ceremony, from the most intimate one like the puja, the religious prayer, or the sangeet, an evening of folk songs, the mehendi, or putting the henna on the bride's hands, to the more public gatherings or ceremonies like different cocktails, you know, moments of sociability outside the traditional marriage rituals. The central moment of the wedding remains the celebration and the reception after the marriage. And this entire set of add-on cards now is accompanied by an RSVP card, Répondez s'il vous plaît, to confirm the invitee's presence at any of the ceremonies. So these could be separate cards or multiple inserts within a single card. Now here's an example of a book wedding card, you know. So you can see the brown border on the left. It frames the card, and then we have these multiple cards inside which present the different motives for each event. You know, text, accompanying texts. And so all the different celebrations of the pre-rituals. And they come in this card which has become a book. And each invitation here has a modified design, as you see, and a different wording, a different text to suit the audience. So the add-on card for the cocktail will not have a Sanskrit shloka or verse. It will have something different. And the puja would have the Sanskrit prayer. And this permits the family now to invite different sets of people for different events. Close family would be invited to the prayers and to all the events, whereas friends could be invited only for a cocktail or for the wedding, and colleagues and friends would be invited perhaps not to the wedding but to the reception. So it's all very highly coded, and this introduces the subtlety which is today required to, in this kind of sociability. The second feature that has contributed to its transformation is the form. While most of the cards remain rectangular, they may also be scrolls, like I just showed you. They could be fans. Some have octagonal shapes. And sometimes they are printed in small books. At a recent marriage of the granddaughter of a very well-known publisher in New Delhi, each member of the family chose literary texts from Indian as well as Western literary traditions. The text, therefore, no longer simply conveys practical information or social indications. It becomes a veritable book, here a literary ontology, which displays both a family tradition, a professional tradition of publishers in that case, and its cultural capital. And that book included original texts by famous foreign authors published by the family firm. The ceremony, strongly marked by Indian customs, here becomes a means to claim an insertion in a culture that defines itself as universal. Earlier enclosed in an envelope, wedding cards today come in boxes. This could be cardboard, it could be hard plastic, or it could be pure silver, similar to a jewelry box made of velvet. So that brings me to the third defining feature of this transformation, which is the material. The handmade paper of the 1970s and 80s has given way to a bewildering range of materials: recycled paper, crepe, zardozi, which is very, fine, rich embroidery, silk, velvet, glazed paper, even papyrus. Fabrics and diamond-studded cards have transformed the ordinary carton invitation. It could even be covered with very thin gold-spun cloth. This is particularly suited to scroll invitations. The current trend is towards traditional Indian fonts or silver-plated cards with embossed content. The wedding card of a celebrity couple recently, the daughter of a big industrialist from Hyderabad and a Bollywood actor, this was in 2010, the wedding card used crushed gemstones and real gold. I would have liked to receive that. And more ordinarily, the invitation could be embellished with small rhinestones, pearl-toned beads, or Swarovski crystals. And the box may be conceived to match the bride's trousseau by its color or its material. In some marriages, a small group of invitees receive an exclusive edition of the wedding card. This may be a limited edition of Ganjifa paintings, which are miniature paintings rendered on playing cards with superfine brushes using natural colors. And in fact, art historians and critics date these Ganjifa meetings to more than 1,000 years. They're absolutely beautiful. So if you receive that, please don't throw it away. Or you might receive a wedding card with a lithograph by the famous contemporary Indian painter, M.F. Hussain, who has done some absolutely extraordinary paintings which you could buy at an auction of Christie's for, well, a couple of millions of dollars. Fourthly now, the iconographic dimension towers over the text. The earlier card separated the image from the text. So the outer side of the card presented an image, and the inside page was devoted to the presentation of textual information, including the family genealogy, the professional status, the titles, if they had any. We saw on the wedding card, very discreetly. You can see that this is a titled family by the Blazons, and then you have Begum. Begum is a Nawab. Like this is a prince and the princess. So the iconographic element is overwhelming today. It accompanies all the elements of the card. And furthermore, the image and color are key elements that mirror the identity of the bridal couple. For example, the color of the paper helps in defining the religious group. Hindus will often use the god, the color red, yellow, or they will use images of Ganesh or Krishna, garlands, peacock feathers, princes and princesses, or Om. And Sikhs and Muslims or Parsis will use calligraphic elements as designs, whereas Christians would be inclined to use the color white. They often have crosses or wreaths or, very different kinds of arrangements of flowers. Fifth, the radical change that we can observe is in its production. The earlier modest wedding printers in those narrow lanes have been replaced by graphic designers in more fashionable parts of the city, by manufacturers, by paper importers. The style of marketing wedding cards has also changed. Online advertising, websites emphasize the possibilities of designing personalized, unique wedding cards. They are now made from the point of view of design, more self-consciously visual, with the mobilization of new visual technologies. The design is used to establish a cultural symbolic value over the event. It becomes an ersatz of the event. In a way similar to what the architect Foster calls the image, which has come to define the cultural value of location, as Guy Juliet noted in his discussion on the shift from visual culture to design. The new form of the wedding card could thus be seen as part of the flow of global culture located in communication. It provides a label of distinction, a differentiated value. One of the features identified by people as constituting design culture. So all these changes have transformed the status of the wedding card. Traditionally, only elite families conserve their wedding cards as a trace of important family events. But this practice was not found in more modest groups. Other reasons rendered these cards they render these cards less ephemeral and immediate. Its metamorphosis into a custom-designed object has prolonged its life. A wedding card with a sign of a well-known painter would definitely not be discarded, nor would a box studded with Swarovski stones or crushed gold be thrown away. It has therefore become less ephemeral. In general, now, boxes embellished by the addition of pearls or precious stones, they can be used later to keep trinkets and therefore they acquire a role beyond their ceremonial life and create a new kind of emotional attachment. We are witnessing here the emergence of an aesthetic object whose new functions are still in the process of being defined through the act of signing or titling, perhaps a little similar to Marcel Duchamp's transformation of found objects into modern art in the early 20th century, even if wedding cards do continue to fulfill their original purpose. So have these changes, for all that, these changes that I've just described in the form, in the material, in the shape, and in the status, have they modified the nature of the object? In the first place, it is difficult to say to which category of things the wedding card now belongs. In trying to describe its new form, I have tried to show how a truly hybrid object, both traditional and modern, ethnic and cosmopolitan, the wedding cards have recourse to a complex management of colors, designs, images, typography, which engage the visual, the textual, the material medium, and even the screen medium or the internet, because we have a beginnings of digital invitations, although it hasn't really caught on, but it's sort of emerging on the margins. So clearly we are confronted with an object that is in transition. The wedding card has become something more than merely functional. It has nonetheless not entirely converted into an object of design, which is what occurred, for example, with the sari. A sari now is a very traditional classic form of clothing, central to Indian material culture. Saris were usually labeled and defined according to the motif or style of weaving from a particular region. So you could have saris that were Murshidabadi, Patola, Banarsi, etc., etc. And so the moment you saw a sari, you labeled it with the name of the region or the kind of motive. But today, saris have become products of big Indian fashion designers from Calcutta, Delhi, or Mumbai. So now we don't talk about a Banarsi sari, we will talk about the Sabyasachi sari. Sabyasachi is a very reputed fashion designer from Kolkata, and he is known to design all the saris of actresses when they get married. And he has one foot in India, of course, and one in Europe. Or there is the Rohit Bal sari, and Rohit Bal is another very famous fashion designer now based in Delhi. The wedding card hasn't yet achieved this status, but it seems to be heading there. Today, it has to be both traditional and modern, ethnic and cosmopolitan, and hence this complex management of colors and design and images and typography. A product of design, then, sometimes integrating ancient or contemporary works of art made of more noble, finer materials. The wedding card is also close to acquiring the status of a commodity. It is on its way to attaining an economic and social life beyond its original use, after the wedding. As I mentioned, it was rarely preserved, and often it was only as a family souvenir. Since some years, it has begun to become an object of collection. Even more, recently in the small city of Gujarat, a state in Western India, an exhibition of wedding cards displayed around 500 wedding cards only from the region of Gujarat. And it, of course, had a certain local success, but it was also largely diffused through internet and announced in the media. One can imagine that in the near future, a wedding card would acquire a market value. It could be bought, it could be auctioned, it could be resold on eBay. The simple invitation with all its different functions, notably which gave a sentiment of belonging to an exclusive group, is doubled henceforth with the nature of a valued gift. gift. This is a word which I have not really developed so far. The notion is important for social anthropology in particular, since the founding essay of Marcel Mauss up to the more contemporary works of Maurice Godelier. In fact, this notion of gift hadn't really occurred to me at the beginning of my inquiry on wedding cards when I proposed a title for my conference to Peter Miller. I was rather thinking of the wedding card as an object which would allow me to analyze the recent transformations in Indian society. The transformations I thought I would perceive were more linked to the distance being taken by Indians from their constraining social and community traditions. Any observer of the Indian scene knows very well that as against the strongly constricting practice of arranged marriages, love marriages are becoming an increasingly accepted form of relationship between a man and a woman. Through the recent changes in wedding cards, the diversity of their formulas, the recourse to new forms of expression of art and design, I thought I was going to analyze the emergence of the individual and his hitherto inhibited, suppressed states and sentiments on the public scene. The wedding card, in my eyes, seemed to permit each individual to show how he or she thinks of himself as distinct from his or her social group, not necessarily conforming to the dictates of tradition, but engaged in a search for originality as a public expression of his personality. And yet, as I sort of moved on looking and studying my collection of wedding cards, I found that if some cards express this kind of consideration and can be taken to publicize the intimate, the majority do not fulfill these expectations. Just like rituals of marriage that are in full explosion in contemporary India. In fact, an analyst recently affirmed in August 2013 that the marriage market is growing by 25 to 30% each year. And in 2 years, it's going to exceed the American wedding market in value. The wedding card then participates in the new forms of social competition between individuals, families, and groups. This is exactly what Mauss proposed in analyzing the social functions of the gift. The gift accelerates social exchanges. It implies a countergift, without which relations of subjection linked to an economic, symbolic, or moral debt would be rapidly created and sustained. But one must not simply analyze the wedding card as an object, but as I have already said, an object with a social life, equipped with an agency, to use Alfred Gell's notion, an agency that permits it to realize social operations. These consist not only of having the invitation accepted, and in fact refusing becomes difficult when the wedding card, through its materiality, manifests the extreme attention that the giver has shown in sending it. But the quality of the object, therefore, with its aesthetic value enhanced by the design, becomes a means of evaluating this attention. But beyond this acceptance, the wedding card also participates in the construction of social relations that are in the throes of rapid change. In traditional societies, where relations are clearly defined, a prestigious invitation much sought after does not necessarily need an exceptional medium. At the court of Versailles, Louis XIV only needed to murmur into the ears of some courtesans the 5 letters Marly to invite them to the very select space of the Chateau of Marly, where he habitually spent his Sundays in the company of a very chosen number of invitees. Would not the exuberance and flamboyance of wedding cards in India be a material resource for a society where elites and middle classes are currently experiencing some profound transformations? Well, I have not presented you with some very closed, wrapped up answers, but this is a research that's still sort of going on in my head, and therefore I'm very curious and interested to know your reactions, your questions, which would certainly help me perhaps abandon some paths and open up others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Will you stay here? And so we'll pretend that we're sitting around a table, and the floor is now open for questions.
Yeah.
I don't mean to bring up something you haven't discussed, but given that this is the middle class and upper classes in India, how have the lower classes invited people to their weddings, and is that changing as well?
Yes. That's a very relevant question. I have some wedding cards which I collected from domestic servants. And so this is, well, not in rural areas, but in towns, not in cities like Delhi, but small provincial towns. Domestic servants are also adopting this means of invitation to weddings, and they're simple cartons. Sometimes they have a little image, but I think this is catching on, and it's easy to classify the high upper end wedding cards, and so this is a collection that's still growing, but I do have some wedding cards that have been sent by domestic servants, and so they give one always to the person who employs them. Yes, that is a must, and that's how it becomes easy to get hold of them. Yeah.
Thank you for the lecture. I have one question. The upper class cards, how are they delivered? By post? Or?
Yes. I sort of referred to that very briefly. They are delivered personally. And so it depends, as I said, it depends on the relationship. For example, if there's a very close relationship, an aunt, a sister, a brother, then the person, the parent of the bride or the groom will personally deliver the card. Otherwise, a son or a daughter could be sent with a box of sweets. Sometimes there's a little gift also. Otherwise, if it's in another town, then it is going to be posted or courier now. Nobody posts letters amongst the upper classes in India now. Nobody uses the post. So they would send that by courier. Yeah. So
just as a follow-up, so within the structure of Marcel Mauss's theory of the gift, where does all those messenger function? How are they functioning? Where are they within this theory, within this structure that you constructed for us?
Well, I think something like an invitation like that would bind you in a closer relationship, and it would define that relationship. For example, I know people who were invited to Lakshmi Mittal's daughter's wedding.
Oh wow!
Yes, and so this was, what begins as a formal invitation. They weren't very close to him, but it binds you in a tighter relationship, which sort of lays down, something you might owe to that person. It extends your social network, but it extends it with strings attached. And then you would want to invite Lakshmi Mittal perhaps also.
But I think if I could just jump on to Itai's question, it seems that now we have some pieces
out of this very, very subtle ethnography towards a critique of Maus. So for instance, Maus doesn't have the servants in his story. That's the blind spot to class in Maus. You talk about the role of design in transforming the object. Maus pays no attention to design. So are there more aspects of what you're doing that could, and I'm assuming that as you presented it, that you didn't initially think that this would be one of the outcomes, but I wonder if we could speculate a little bit about how this ethnography could in fact be used to sharpen up or underline gaps in Maus's treatment of the gift.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, and the kind of well, it's not. I mean, when the domestic servant is giving the card to the employer, that's not a gift, I think. That wouldn't function as a gift. So it's it wouldn't, or it would function as a counter gift. Yeah, it could function as a counter gift because the domestic servant is already indebted to the employer, and there's some kind of bonds there already. And so, yeah, he's using the gift as he's using the wedding card as a counter gift. So that's the different classes. And design, yeah, well, without the design, it remains a simpler form of exchange. It's not a transaction, but it remains a simpler form of exchange. I think the introduction of design and this heavy elaboration and ornamentation, this decoration, sort of shifting it, nudging it towards.
Well, without the Swarovski and the gold and the crushed precious stones, it's a piece of paper which has a symbolic value. It's pointing to the event to come. But the design introduces the object itself.
Yes.
It's a promise. It's a promise for something. More than it is a gift in itself, right? It's a promise for a gift. And the gift will be the event rather than the object actually being an event. A little bit like votive objects in which you deposit them and they are promise for something that will happen. And that moment of the event, that is to say the wedding, is the moment in which the two classes will bound together or the ties will become closer. It's not in the card itself. It's in the promise that the card delivers.
Well, I think it sort of extends beyond the event itself. That's what's interesting, because it just doesn't lead up to the event and stop there. And I think all this design and this is creating something that goes beyond, giving it an afterlife. But
well, how do you think? I mean,
yes. Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question on that, because I noticed that one of your invitations was Kareena Kapoor's wedding invitation.
Yes.
Which maybe she's a Bollywood actress.
Yes.
Who don't watch Bollywood movies. And that made me wonder: are these objects, in addition to being displayed in that interesting exhibit which you mentioned in Gujarat, are they being disseminated on the internet, in magazines? Are people looking to the design of these objects and trying to emulate those of Bollywood stars and royalty and industrialists' children?
Yes, that's how I got this gown, because I wasn't invited to that. Yes, it's on the internet. So you have a lot of wedding cards, like I've just shown you one here, but the biggest wedding card was the wedding of the famous Indian actor, son Amitabh Bachchan. And that card was sort of diffused on the net, but very blurry versions, because they all kept it wrapped up in, it was all very secretive and not public at all. So, and then there are other wedding cards. The wedding card of this very big wedding between the son of the Indian industrialist and an actor in Hyderabad. That's on the net. There are lots of these famous cards sort of going around on the net, and yes, it does have an impact, because then when firms are advertising, they say, we'll give you a card like Shilpa Shetty or Aishwarya Rai. You want a wedding card like hers. It's just like when tourists go to these, you know, they go to the Taj Mahal, and you have the photographers and they say, Madam, Madam, sit here, we will take you where Prince Charles sat or Princess Diana. And so it's creating a new kind of mood. But this card cannot become a trend, because it's only royalty uses these kind of very simple cards. You can't, and so other royalty will be using this kind of very simple card. And so as you can see, there has not been much change in the royalty cards, you know, because the red one I showed you, it was along the same lines. They haven't gone on flashy and bling bling. So this is true royalty, but the others, the rich actresses, they are going a little bling bling, but that's, so the bling bling effect is creeping down, of course. It's creeped down to the middle classes, and then it's sort of going to creep down perhaps. But it's very expensive just now, because wedding cards go out in hundreds. And it's becoming an important expenditure of the wedding. Not as expensive as the sari, of course, or the clothes, but yeah.
Thanks for your talk. I'm also kind of piggybacking on other questions. I'm wondering about the extended use, the reuse of the cards afterwards,
Yes.
and perhaps their public display in the home or wherever they are. How is that, or do you know how that is affecting kind of social relationships and ties? Are they ever used intentionally as a trigger to, you know, for someone, a guest, to perhaps notice and ask about?
Yes.
You've been
No,
included in this, and also maybe
Yeah.
that complicates a little bit of the
Yes.
gift, you know, this.
Yeah, these are very interesting questions about the wedding card, because all the wedding cards I collected, a lot of people told me they throw them away. Everyone throws away wedding cards. They get them by the dozen, you know. Of course, I get quite a few also, and I keep them because they seem to me so extraordinary, and I couldn't throw them away. But everyone throws them away. They keep them for some time, then they throw them away, and then they don't talk about it. You don't display it. It's never, you know, it's not like other objects, which when Indians travel, they come back, they bring back objects, or sometimes Christmas cards would be displayed, or Diwali cards, you know. Those are objects would be displayed. But wedding cards are never displayed. Never. It's really private. It's very intimate in that sense. It's an intimate object. And it's never talked about. That's interesting, because you don't sort of go around asking people, yes, did you receive a wedding card? And you never mention it. You never show it. And people gave me wedding cards when I asked them, you know, please don't throw away. They said, oh, we've made a bag. It's like recycled paper. You go and dump it away after some time. And they said, oh, we were just going to throw it away. Oh, I had a beautiful one. I threw that away. So it's really something that it would be collected. It doesn't disappear, you know, because then we'll find that because of the material, and that's a follow-up, there would be an industry, there would be boys, little boys, street boys collecting this, and then, you know, it will be bought up, and then it will be transformed into something else, because nothing's ever thrown away. So it's a kind of a recycling machine. But it's not, it's never shown, and it's never talked about. And you could say, yes, we have a wedding, you know. Everyone says, oh goodness, I've got so many weddings. It's like academics would say, oh my goodness, I have to go to so many conferences. So I have a couple of articles I must finish. In winter, Indians are saying, oh my goodness, I've got so many weddings to go to. So it's, but not, and then anyway, when you arrive at the wedding, you never come with the invitation card. Never. It's very kind of fluke. and you never answer the RSVP. It's a kind of no one ever answers this. You know, either to say they're coming, or to say, in fact, it's considered very rude. Because if you invite people for a wedding, you can never ask them, are you coming or you're not coming? Because that's social etiquette. But you have to organize food according to your estimate. And even when you come to, you know, an Indian's home, they will never ask you things like which refer to quantity, because it's considered very rude. Yeah, so I'm digressing.
I was wondering if you could speak at all to Indian communities outside of India,
Yes.
and whether you've seen similar trajectories in this, or if it's a very different, you know, social contrast.
Well, there is definitely an NRI aspect to this question. I didn't get time to go into that. But yes, there are, first of all, wedding card printers who are catering exclusively to non-resident Indians. Their demands are a little different. They are a little bit more conscious of design, so they would include, you know, colors which Indians wouldn't. Their cards are more, well, they look richer. And so all of these kind of elements are definitely related to the NRI use of wedding cards. But this is definitely a niche in this market now. And it's mostly done online. And so you have a lot of companies now in England, in America, just like you have a site selling bridal saris, designer saris and suits, etc., etc. So you have sites now catering to NRIs. And that's interesting, this management of traditional elements with, you know, some elements of the host culture as well. And that makes it a very interesting aspect of the question. Makes it a little different from the Indian market wedding cards. So you can tell. You can tell if you receive a wedding card, this is not this is perhaps, but as yet I haven't been able to distinguish, you know, this is an American Indian wedding card, or I think that still has to be gone into. But I think that they would show up some interesting features related to the host culture and practices, host cultural practices. Unless the wedding's being held in a village in India, which they're also doing now. Yeah?
So I'm just returning to the idea of the counter gift. So if you get an invitation that's very elaborate, are you expected to give an elaborate gift in return? Is there the amount of money that is spent in a very public way on an invitation? Are you then, is there a gift culture that's in response to the invitation?
Yeah, this is very strictly laid down, unsaid, but is that when you receive, so when it becomes a kind of an expensive item, then you are obliged to give a gift, which is related to the value of this invitation. And this simply extends a traditional practice, which was at weddings, when you receive a gift, you have to give back something equivalent. So in fact, when I got married, my husband was very astonished because I was giving back all the gifts plus some more gifts. And so this continues. It's if you're invited, if you receive a very elaborate invitation, then obviously you cannot go there with, say, some flowers or, probably buy the most expensive painting and turn up with that. So in that sense, yes, it imposes some material response, and then of course in the long term, it introduces other kinds of social responses and relations.
So then does the invitation serve the purpose of the counter gift that the married couple is supposed to give back to the guests, or is that in addition to the invitation?
Oh yes, this happens between the families. The married couple normally doesn't do anything. They just receive whatever gift they would receive, and then the parents would reciprocate. Or if they felt they've done enough already, then perhaps they wouldn't. For example, if you're already invited and your expenses paid with the plane ticket to Bali and the wedding is taking place there, and you spend a week, then you won't get another gift at the end of it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that's happening now. So in tradition, initially in the 1960s it was very simple, because I told you about the fear of the income tax raids and ostentatious display. Is that you went with a box of sweets and perhaps a scarf, and you gave them back, and then they give you a gift, of course. They give you a gift, so you went with a box of sweets. But now, of course, it's another dimension. Well, I hope I made you all dream a little bit. And now you're waiting for the next wedding invitation to turn up, of course. And I hope for your sakes it's going to be a box decorated with crushed gold.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much, and the conversation can continue informally outside.
Thank you.